All right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in your part of the world. All right, so I don't know if I was going to make a video in this or not, but I guess I will. So, this red Jeep is my parts Jeep, but for right now, I'm fixing this to at least use it to use this plow. Because winter is here, this plow does work, this Jeep does run and drive, it's just, it doesn't charge. So, yeah, doesn't run for very long when it's just running off the battery, especially if you're using that thing. So, the purpose of this video is what I'm doing to, quote unquote, to resolve this problem as well as sort of upgrade this problem. Okay, so you can see right there, old alternator removed. I could just real easy throw a standard stock alternator back on this thing and call it a day, but this pump that runs the plow, this electric pump that runs the hydraulics for the plow, robs so much damn power it will kill this motor because the alternator can't react fast enough. On top of, the alternator does not put out enough amps to run that pump. It's the same thing with that damn thing. That, being it has a winch on it, if this thing's not at high idle, the alternator barely can actually keep up with it. You can see the voltmeter go down, and it can barely react fast enough. And it's one of the problems with these Jeeps that have the voltage regulator in the PCM, just like this one's in the PCM, that one's in the PCM. The PCM cannot react fast enough for this alternator to run, as well as give the either the winch or this pump enough power to not dip below 13 volts. That running that winch, even at high idle, which is like 1,000, 1,100 RPM, it still dips the voltage to 12, under 12 if you're using it long enough to where it's draining the battery. I know every Cherokee owner has ran into this with a winch or something that has a high amount of amp draw on the electrical system. And the factory alternator on these Cherokees is a 90 amp alternator, and that is above like 1,200 RPM is 90 amps. At idle, I believe they're right around 50 or 60 amps. I will put something on the screen, but the standard alternator on that one and on this one are 90 amps. It's not enough for what that demands and what that demands for power when you use them. That's why these things die or can barely idle when the battery voltage is actually low. The alternator just cannot keep up. So, with that being said, on Rock Auto, for a decent price, you can get from a 90 amp alternator to, I believe this is a 120 amp alternator, which is above 1,200 RPM of the engine. So at this one even says, oh, let's go look. The regulator is the computer. So on the sticker here, it is a 120 amp alternator. Let's see if you can focus. Idle, it says about 90 amps. So idle, this went from 50, 60 amps to 90 amps idle. But this is one alternator. Now, to not kill the battery, I'm taking that AC compressor off. And over here, what you see on the bench here is another Ford Explorer / Ford Ranger 3G alternator. Now this is a 130 amp alternator, 99 at idle. That's what this one says. So the upgraded one for that Jeep over there is getting a 120 amp alternator, 90 at idle. I'm also going to put this on because This is known as a Ford 3G alternator that's made from like 93 on up to like 2005, but the wiring on how this 3G alternator is wired is the same for Ranger, Explorer, Crown Vic, Thunderbird, F-150, Bronco, Mustang, anything with the 4.6, 5.4. The case is different, but the internals of the alternator are the same. They have this voltage regulator on the back. That's what this is right here. Voltage regulator, your stator, and then this wire is supposed to go to a key switch source with a incandescent light for as the warning light. As soon as the this thing starts spinning, creating voltage, the warning light goes out, but you need this as like key switch power for the alternator to start charging. And then this is your charging cable. This is self-contained. Now this thing broke already from this little wiring harness kit I bought, but it'll work. It'll work. This is the whole point of this thing, is to have dual alternators on this Cherokee to not only have the adequate amount of amps to run that plow, but also because the voltage regulator in the PCM for these Cherokees sucks to react. This thing will react faster because the voltage regulator is right here and it's a self-contained unit. So, with that being said, back over to here. This alternator, the diameter case is slightly larger than the standard alternator. So I'm going to have to come in here with a burr bit, aluminum burr bit, and basically, kind of hard to see, but where I'm pointing the light at, I gotta clear that out, take that metal bracket off, and cut that as well, and clearance this bracket for that alternator to go in. Then take this AC compressor off and build a bracket for that 3G Ford alternator to go on. And we're going to take this AC compressor out. This Jeep doesn't have AC because it's a parts junk Jeep. So take this out and half, like, very rig up, very kind of ghetto rig this alternator into this fuse box / get my key switch out here, and then just put the charging cable right to the positive battery terminal, and it will basically, you'll have the factory alternator, which should just be the alternator that got killed because of this pump, this hydraulic pump, and then the Ford alternator above it is going to run just to have dual alternators, have enough amps to run this pump without like basically taking out of the battery. That's the whole premises of this. So that's going to be kind of an explanation. I might do something similar with this one later down the road, but for right now, this is going to be the dual alternator setup on this Cherokee. So I'm trying to get the factory one back in the factory location, and then I'll work on that one. All right, don't mind the heater noises in the background. It's like 17 degrees outside, and the barn's up to 45, and I hopefully you can hear me over this. But here we go. The alternator for a Ford Explorer / Ranger is installed. So before we get into that, the last clip was basically getting the factory alternator down there installed, all set together. So one thing I want to kind of correct myself on from the last clip, which was like a week ago of making. 97 to 99 has 90 amp alternators for the standard for these Jeeps. You can get a 120 amp alternator for a 97 to 99. It's two different you're able to get a standard 90 amp or the 120 amp. These 2000s to 01 get a 120 amp right out of the get-go. So this one's a little more capable of putting out for that winch, but that winch actually I think robs less power than this pump. Anyway, so this is a 130 Ford Explorer / Ford Ranger 4-liter OHV engine alternator. Ford uses this, what's known as a 3G alternator, from like 93 all the way up to like 2004 era, 2005, roughly in that area. It slightly changes with a different connector on the back here, but they're all about the same. So this is the regulator back here, just like last clip. This harness I got from eBay. Someone makes a harness that you can just real cleanly put one of these alternators. There's also, there's also on eBay you can get a regulator that you don't need this warning light wire, and it makes it a true one-wire alternator for these Ford alternators. That's another like 30 bucks. I don't care to do that. So the bracket, in terms of getting this alternator on here, are literally 2 pieces of 316 flat iron from like Tractor Supply. Marked drill bolts, bolted them down, and then kind of just roughly put the alternator on there. Marked where the alternator was, try to line up the belt as much as possible. I did have to slot the bolts that bolt to this side forward and backwards, just so I can adjust the alternator a little bit. So, and same with this one, just not as bad, but I just have flat pieces of metal bolted to where the AC compressor would go, and then the footprint for bolts for this alternator are wider, so I was able to, this one is like in between a bolt and the mounting bolt right here at the end of my finger. Can't really see it. There's a bolt underneath here that holds this bracket onto the head, so it's right in between there. The belt alignment is decent, okay. I had to adjust it a little bit for the water pump. This one down here on the fan pulley, it's right at the edge, but I think because this fan pulley is actually going bad, it's got some play in it. But for right now, for what this Jeep is meant for, I hope this will just last. I did have to buy another belt. I needed the one size shorter than the factory belt that goes on this. So there is a one size lower belt on this. I'll have the belt number on the screen. But this is a 6-rib belt pulley off the Ford Explorer Ranger 4-liter alternator, and goes right on here. It's got rivet nuts in these plates, just so I can, it's just easier not to try and do a nut on the back side. This is very crudely put together, like threw it together to make it work, to use it as the plow. So one size smaller belt, literally the AC compressors inside and the back. Just simple, not even using any welding at all. It's 3/16 plate by 2 inches wide, and it's like a piece that's like 8 foot length, cut 6 inches long on both sides, bolted down. The bolts here for going into the AC bracket are M8 by 125 bolts. I think they're like an inch long. And then I use 3/8 by 16 thread, 3.5 inches long. And then if you can see here, the silver, these are collar spacers, 3/8 collar spacers, just to space the bottom of the alternator up. I did clearance the alternator a little bit, but I don't think that was necessary because it mostly hits right on either side of it. They're literally there to space it up to keep this level. This coolant hose doesn't seem like it gets crushed at all with the hood down. it seems fine. But if I did have to change this coolant hose, I'd go with a I think 87 to 91 Renix 1 coolant hose, because these later Cherokees have the hose just going over the AC compressor. The early ones have the hose going around the back of the AC compressor. They're much larger. So a Renix era 4-liter Jeep hose would actually work to have this be behind the alternator. I don't care enough to put this hose behind it. Unless this hose bursts or start leaking, I'm going to leave it as is. I don't have to. This radiator in this thing's already starting to seep down there. You can't really see it in the dark hole. It's already starting to seep. Right now, don't care. Just need this thing to work with both alternators. This battery is probably on its last leg. It does not have the capacity like it once did. So this battery is probably going bad because it is a 21 and it's like 2025, and most batteries don't last past 5 years. So this is getting close to 5 years. Just to keep from killing this battery, we have this alternator and then the factory alternator down there. Both charge it about 14.5 volts. What else? This is everything is finished. I had to replace that fan just so this thing was overheating the last time I was using it to plow. This whole wiring harness thing is self-contained. This wire from the regulator to the stator, and then this is power hot all the time. And then this wire basically comes down here, over here to this incandescent warning light that I got any general auto parts store, just like this little fuse tap general auto parts store, and just crimp connect a laying around wire up to it. So this fuse gets power when the engine's running. So this will basically energize the alternator once the engine's running, and it goes through a warning lamp. You can use a resistor in order to get around not using a warning lamp. It didn't come in time, so you don't need the resistor if you just do an incandescent light bulb like that warning lamp. Just if that burns out, the alternator stops working, but it works. Modified this a little bit so this can close again. Again, I cut kind of the side of it out so it can go out. Again, quite crudely on how I was putting this together. See, the warning lamp's down there. I don't really care to see this. I did start it. I did test it. Both alternators are definitely making a big difference when running that. So before, I don't think I have a clip, but before, when you use the pump to get the plow up, the voltmeter will go well below 10 volts, like basically just dogpiling this battery, and then the alternator will come back. With both these alternators, this pump does not make this battery dip below 12 now. It actually goes to 12 and then back up. It takes it a bit to respond. So this alternator is definitely helping out with the factory 120 amp alternator. So right now at idle I have like 200 amps of power to run this plow, possibly if you wanted to run a winch too, for this thing to not kill. Well, it's going to kill two alternators if it does kill an alternator, but now I have two alternators with one battery, and this battery will not hate life anymore for that drawing so much power. Again, this was crudely done. I threw this together the cheapest and fastest way I possibly could, just so this thing will be a usable vehicle for the plow, and I don't kill one alternator. I'll have two to get the load out and not kill this battery, even though this battery is probably already pretty much needs to be replaced at this point. I think that's pretty much it. I might put a I might do a comparison at the end of the video with one alternator versus two alternators on the dash for the voltmeter, because that voltmeter is pretty dang accurate. But I think that's pretty much it. You can do this again. I literally did this as cheapest and fastest way possible. I'm just using flat stock and spacers to have this alternator bolted to that bracket. No welding required. I was thinking about welding, but I was able to get away with no welding and just rivet nut. Yeah. You can do this if you want to with your Jeep, if you have a winch, if you're constantly winching, dual alternator, because that's the one thing with these things. You can get a, I think, 250 amp or a 320 amp alternator, but right then and there you're spending $450, almost $550 for an alternator, and those things are massive, and trying to fit any sort of massive alternator down there in that factory location, royal pain. You're not, you can't get a higher, bigger amp alternator down there unless you do like the Durango 130 amp alternator. But even then, that's 10 amps is not enough in my eyes to make that worthwhile. So combined here, 120 and 130, I have 250 amps above 1100 RPM. At idle, I have 200 amps between both these alternators. And by the way this pump runs, already checking it, I've already ran this thing with both alternators. Dual alternators definitely makes a big difference. The voltmeter does not go below 12, because one alternator with this pump will make this battery just bury to 9 to 10, under 10, almost 9 volts, which is very hard on the battery. So yeah, at the end I'll do a comparison, but this is basically thrown together dual alternators on a Cherokee. Alright, here's one alternator lifting the plow. That likes to I don't know if you can see that. It likes to drop to about 11, and it drops pretty fast. Alright, here's with both alternators. It generally doesn't go below 13 now, or it takes a long time for it to actually. So, running the plow. I don't know if you can see that. I don't know if you can see that, but it does make a big difference on the impact it has on the electrical system. As I said, with one alternator, it will just dip it right to like 11, 10 volts. This thing will only dip to 13 volts. So, I say that's a successful dual alternator setup. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, whatever, yada yada, you know the deal.